Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the live broadcast entirely dedicated to the theme of Kundalini, but the main emphasis on the questions that have been submitted in advance. Before we go into the questions, I feel perhaps it would be appropriate just to give us an overview of what we really set to discuss here. What is it that we are speaking to at all? So, Kundalini, myth and reality. I'm pretty certain most of you have gathered here know what the term represents. There are many different scholarly references in terms of the etymology of that word. I would prefer perhaps use one tantric in particular, which in a way is considered to be where Kundalini as a term, as a concept, originates from. And although the term Kundalini itself, though may not be figured in some of the more ancient scriptures and epics and written records in human history, we know that what Kundalini stands for exists and existed in practically all cultures, all ancient civilizations. In this case, we will bounce off that what came from Indian subcontinent, where that concept of Kundalini is inseparable from, because Kundalini is the very formidable term which stands for none other than our own dear self. It is the ultimate reality in its kinetic form. So the term Kundalini, etymologically speaking, is made out of two words, Kunda and Ling. So the two terms combined means something coiled around the lingam 3.5 times, as the scriptures indicate. So it's this kunda coiled around the lingam, that verticality. What is this lingam? Again, most of you know today that there is this associated with Indian culture, with Hinduism, term Shiva Lingam. Shiva Lingam represents, in its utmost sense, awareness, Shiva. And in terms of its metaphysical connotations, in terms of the symbol for what it stands for, Lingam is also often referred to particular important places in the spiritual anatomy of consciousness. So there are lingam, not just lingam up there, let's say, which often portrayed in esoteric books of, let's say, Buddhist Tantra, Hindu-based Tantra, with the various kind of protruding aspects like stupas above the heads of the divinities and those like Buddha-like beings. But there are lingams also within the spiritual anatomy, so to speak. And Kundalini as a term, as a concept here, represents that particular aspect of something coiled around the lingam somewhere down there. This is, let's say, put it this way. But what is it? What the lingam stands for, to decode that term, it is awareness. because the term Shiva stands for that absolute, pure awareness. So to decode the term Kundalini, we could adopt perhaps this approach that it's something that consciousness here coils around itself, or awareness contracted to itself in series of these coils, where it then enjoys this slumber, enjoys this self-imposed state of homeostasis. And speaking from that esoteric based language, it is the reality that we live, all of us, reality that we share. So that reality that we share, as many scriptures, yogic scriptures, Vedic scriptures, tantric scriptures allude, is that it's the outcome and the result of awareness, as it were, having a slumber to its essence. It's in a state of self-imposed slumber. And as some of the other, let's say, esoteric perspectives give this interesting analogies, and as it is in a state of slumber, it oozes that venom, because Kundalini is also, traditionally speaking, often spoken in terms of its connotations to the great serpent. So that slumbering serpent, oozing venom, and that venom is intoxicating the serpent to the essence of what the serpent is. So awareness, in other words, is intoxicated in a state of slumber. So this is decoding the mythical origins of the term Kundalini, so that we as moderns can begin to understand, begin to approach this topic. The subtitle, Myth and Reality, is placed provocatively. In other words, Kundalini, myth and reality. Because here, it's neither myth nor reality exclusively. What Kundalini here represents is where we cannot distinguish that what stands here for that English term myth, and that what stands here for reality. And this would be perhaps the most helpful understanding in terms of how to reflect on what Kundalini represents in terms of its stature, in terms of its status. It's that what here represents reality in its concealed state of homeostasis, where the reality is, as it were, dressed in form and phenomena, and that the mythological origin of all this is inseparable from the reality that we all share. So in other words, we can dismiss the term myth as something gone by age, something that is no longer there, something that heralded a particular phase in human history, where some of the myths that survived our time indicate and give us access, perhaps, whatever that keyhole viewpoint of how the life must have been for our predecessors. But this would be perhaps way too flat and not enough an analogy in terms of what the term myth here represents. We know also that myths are constructed on a daily basis, and we partake in these myths. So these myths, this reality where reality and myth and the line between is blurred, is what we all live. At times, we are given the access to trespass on a territory where reality gives us direct insight into the essence of who we are. At other times, We are entrenched, engrossed, intoxicated by that what the myth here represents as that shared consensus. We all live always in mythological reality, even if we feel and think of ourselves as this highly evolved, sophisticated, modern beings who have came to a point in time when mythology no longer serves any purposes. It's the stuff to entertain us in the young years, perhaps the stuff of academic studies, one way or another. That what the myth here stands for is no longer applicable to our day and age. But that's the superficial perspective, and this is where I felt the term Kundalini, myth and reality, is very fitting, because it's both at the same very time. There is this mythology of all kinds that being born in the matrix, in the shared matrix of our shared existence, how this what begins to crystallize and gain its kind of ideological identity can also be spoken in terms of what the myth here stands for. But one way or another, all this is inseparable from the activity of that dormant or steered or awakened or fully ascended consciousness. So this is really the topic of our today's gathering. And many questions that have been submitted in advance will open up an opportunity and the possibility to redress and to go back to readjust this understanding, which is strongly being felt here as a necessity of time. Because the term Kundalini, the concept of Kundalini, enjoys tremendous ambivalence when it comes to a variety of different spiritual circles. To begin with, the term Kundalini in itself is specific to particular culture. And as has been mentioned, that what Kundalini represents exists and existed in absolutely all ancient civilizations. There is no doubt about that. Our predecessors, we could speculate, lived in much greater coherence and much greater connection to their spirits than us moderns, where that gradual, let's say, phase of perhaps that very same newly created mythology, the mythology of the modern age, replaced this. And the gap between the subject and object, the connection to the being, is being perhaps reduced to the further depth of all that what this slumber represents. So the reality of Kundalini here only relevant when we speak about it with reference to particular culture. And in our day and age, in our gradually, rapidly globalized culture, the term Kundalini simply does not figure. It exists on the periphery of culture instead. Interestingly enough, this is also true to spiritual circles. In other words, Kundalini as a term, what it represents, obviously would be on the periphery of our culture, because ours is a secular culture. But it is interesting that the term Kundalini enjoys ambivalence even inside the spiritual circles, where there are perspectives where Kundalini is considered just some kind of psychophysiological phenomena. That psychophysiological phenomena that some people go and others don't, but it has nothing to do with the real purpose, the real goal, and the real, let's say, deal of what this is all about. So this work is dedicated to separate wheat from the chaff as much as we can, and to reconnect to the very meaning of what the term Kundalini here stands for in terms of what and how it translates into our, let's say, coming of age in the process which could be spoken of as being and becoming, that eternal becoming whilst remaining nothing other than being. And the dynamic here is checked by the activity of Kundalini. In other words, Kundalini here could be spoken of in terms of the barometer of our consciousness. It is to the degree to which our Kundalini is active, awakened, steered, we could speak of the way how self-aware we are. And this is what we have been doing for the past nearly 20 years. And the major offering resulted in an online course delivered 2 years' time under the title Kundalini and the power behind ultimate knowledge, power and joy. So in other words, this was something we felt which the time is ready for, where certain very important adjustments required in terms of not speaking of demystifying Kundalini, because that has been done everywhere. The whole point is that demystification of Kundalini here led to shallowness in terms of understanding of what the process really represents. Because the process here we speak of is nothing short of maturation of the soul. So self-actualization and self-realization is impossible from the activity of Kundalini. And one can find references to that in all major sources within the tradition where the term itself comes from. So I thought to give this sweeping, let's say, perspective with some of the more specific notes, which gives us the platform now to bounce off. And we have some, quite a few questions here printed in advance. There were more submitted. Unfortunately, I doubt we will be able to answer all the questions, even with all the design, with all the wish on our part. It will take us till tomorrow to deal with all the questions. So therefore, we have selected some of the questions that can give us access, all of us together, gathered today, and those who will watch this thereafter, in a certain, not necessarily sequential manner how these questions came, but more in terms of giving us this a steady, easy access, and then it gives us the possibility to go into a greater depth whilst, as it were, giving us chance to warm ourselves up a little bit. So, Kundalini, acceptance and disruption. Usually we omit the names of the people just for the sake of respecting privacy and anonymity. And it is still helpful to have these names. So thank you all, those of you who have openly submitted these questions and given their names, because sometimes, believe it or not, additional insights are gained from just looking at the name. Anyway, the first question, and there are two: what reality needs to be accepted before going on a journey for Kundalini awakening? And another question: what will be disrupted if we go on a journey to explore our Kundalini? So I felt like this is a fitting question to begin, so as to separate wheat from the chaff. What really needs to be accepted before going on a journey for Kundalini awakening? Well, perhaps the most important thing that needs to be accepted is that we are not going on a journey of Kundalini awakening. This is the number one understanding. It's the other way around. It's not us who are going on the journey of Kundalini awakening. Kundalini awakens to herself. It's the power of self-revelation. And we are, all of us are, without exception, in a way, these projected forms and phenomena, which is held by the power of self-reflective awareness as the matrix or the matrix of this creation. And Kundalini is that, what is the very mover and shaker of all the permutations. So the first thing to accept is something which may be not possible for many of us, and for some it will even have the air of earnest or some kind of what defies, let's say, our more rational approach, is that we need to accept that we do not have reality of our own, that the reality, that what we refer to as our reality, it's but the reality of that Kundalini, that which is our own very dear consciousness. So the second question, what will be disrupted if we go on a journey to explore our Kundalini? We could easily say that everything will be disrupted and shall be disrupted. That's the whole point of Kundalini in its essence, what Kundalini represents. If it doesn't disrupt anything, then that's not Kundalini. That's the whole metaphysics of the Kundalini. Not long ago, we paid tribute to Carl Jung at one of our presentations in Zurich, where the historical lectures or seminars rather on Kundalini were given by the great psychologist of the 20th century. And according to Carl Jung, Kundalini is the power behind the individuation. So awakening of the Kundalini is that, it's the greatest disruption, which is also paradoxically not possible to be without in terms of the growth into the knowledge of who we are. We have no understanding, no access to the essence of who we are, even at the level of what is spoken in terms of this embodiment, until Kundalini begins to show us all that what was prior to that neatly hidden in the recesses of the subconscious and the unconscious psyche. So that should give us as this entrance to further questions. Kundalini rising or a spinal sweep? There was a significant, first I will read a short background, and then there are a couple of questions. There was a significant moment when I had a spinal sweep where light came through my spine up to my crown as one big storm through my body. I know I had, prior to this event, suffered a lot of distress, but this felt different and very powerful. In my Kundalini rising, I had a lot of visuals and phenomena happen, and it was overwhelming. And often I could interpret what was happening. But at one moment, the energy rose up so strongly that it took me to a being of light with lots of rainbow rays. I could just look at it and observe. It was so beautiful. I didn't merge with it though. Questions. Is this a mirror of my own higher self? Does this mean that the prana goes through the Sushumna channel? The response to the first question, is this a mirror of my own higher self? I would like to offer perhaps an interesting response to this for you to reflect on. Everything that you look at, everything that you smell, everything that you touch everything that you feel in any other cognitive, let's say, powers ignited by the life force itself is a mirror of your own higher self. So this is the platform from where we speak. We speak from the platform of Advaita Tantra, the Tantra of monistic perspective. And from that point of view, everything is nothing other than your own very self. Of course, it's not applicable or seems like a very high plank to apply in our daily life. However, reflecting, considering that has value of its own. So therefore, I'm offering this as a response to whether this was the mirror of your own higher self. Because everything that we look at is none other than our own self. Some people go through what Deepak Chopra refers to as diabolical experiences. Some of us go through the dark night of the soul, horrors that might be presented that begins to be released deep from the unconscious. That does not mean that we've nothing to do with it. Equipped with this understanding, we view everything in the same light of detachment, whilst also knowing that whatever we look at is only possible for us to recognize in the first place is because it is checked by the dynamics of us being the observer, and that what we are observing are none other than one and only reality. The second question, does this mean that the prana goes through the Sushumna channel? I cannot tell you this and to give these diagnostics, but from what you have shared here as that spinal sweep, it could possibly be. This does not necessitate to make a conclusion that that in itself is Kundalini rising. And as we will speak further down, addressing other questions, this will become clearer. What do I mean by that? Why not every movement of prana in Sushumna to be considered as a Kundalini rising proper? Okay. This takes us to the question on Kundalini and plant medicine. Background. I have had profound experiences in psychedelic assisted therapy, both as a client and as a facilitator, in ceremonies in a safe and sacred shamanic container. And in mine and my clients' experiences, the plant spirit feels like a goddess and a natural force with consciousness that may be comparable to the Kundalini Shakti force. My question, is Kundalini related to the spirits of plant medicine? If yes, how? Again, I don't want to make it sounding as there is this blanket that will cover all the questions, but it's very, very tempting not to dismiss an opportunity and to give us a proper understanding of what Kundalini is. Absolutely all activities in our neurophysiology are the activities of Kundalini, because Kundalini is consciousness. Consciousness. In the Kundalini course that I've mentioned at the beginning, we deal with that with great precision and clarity in terms of how initially 3 stages of Kundalini as Shakti begins to give the possibility to manifestation to take place, and it is only one aspect of that Shakti, Prana Shakti, or Prana Kundalini, that is what we behold here as the entirety of creation, and that's the process we undergo in reverse in terms of its withdrawal. So everything that is experienced, and all this what you have described, these plant spirits felt like goddess. A poet who is taken by a muse can report this experience to be nothing other than being taken by the power of the goddess. Someone who is intoxicated in a moment of giving oneself entirely to the music. Just check how Jimi Hendrix played his guitar. Didn't he look totally and entirely possessed? To me, it's clear possession by the power of the goddess. So it can be from a very, very tempered, almost invisible, to a very dramatic way, as in the case, let's say, with the Jimi Hendrix, right? Not maybe your cup of tea in terms of music, but it's a perfect example to illustrate how everything can be felt as a manifestation of the goddess. So yes, and that's how. That takes us to the following questions: spontaneous movements. And now we're becoming to address, now we're coming closer to the actual somatic nature of the process. I have a question about spontaneous movements that can be quite intense, that happen when I sit quietly and still and just observe the energy and sensations in my body. I don't think they are Kriyas in the traditional sense, as they don't appear like the spiritual Kriyas I have seen at all. These are more like spontaneous, sudden discharge of energy. They seem quite repetitious and have been going on for years. I don't see any underlying pictures or memories that might be causing them. Question: I'm wondering if they are useful or helpful as unfolding, or if they are just repetitive manifestations of energy that just serve as a temporary discharge. Okay, so let's clarify right away, because this is very, very important. In our language, in the work that we do, we call all these manifestations Kriyas, irrespective of the form they take or how they appear to an eye or an ear. In other words, it doesn't have to look like anything that you have come across. It doesn't have to feel like anything that you might have experienced before. But what this really is all about is that with the greater pranic activity, let alone when Kundalini is fully awakened and the process of expansion and ascent begins thereafter without much delay, it is always accompanied by purging out of the system all these samskaras, these psychic impressions, because these psychic impressions act as this torf, as that what waxed the system, and it needs to be melted. So from the alchemical point of view, tremendous heat is required. Therefore, all early phases of Kundalini, whenever it is accompanied by that deep down the internal movement, is known as a hot, fiery phase, because Kundalini herself, as that term Bhairavi represents here, is the power of fire. It's literally that what here in the alchemy of yoga spoken of in terms of the power of the fire. It is located down there in Muladhara, where the sun is located in the chest as the seat of the centrality of our awareness, and the higher cortex is here, the seat of the moon. But we don't want to go there now. What we want to establish very clearly is that all these movements are facilitated by the awakened pranic currents now that are doing their work, doing their spring cleaning. How and what, we've no idea. How long it will take, we've no idea. Yogis, those who have given themselves to this as basically their day job, known to go through these processes for years. Those who have dedicated their entire life to the pursuit of that. So for us moderns, we should steadfast ourselves, fasten our seatbelt, and enjoy the ride, because it might and most likely will take for the rest of our life to truly unravel all that. And in a way, this is more preferable because we will be spared to the casualties that are often associated to a more dramatic, intense, or as tradition referred to as violent process, when things done in a much quicker phase, but requires certain supervision and certain safety valves. Whereas the gradual process could take us for years, and that, as I said, is more preferable. So do not worry that this has been going for years. Just give yourself to a well-proven methodology. Do attend programs on a regular basis. It's very important to sit in a group where this can be facilitated and where the facilitation brings about the possibility of quickening. What people go through in a manner of few days in appropriately created containers would take years to accomplish alone at home. This is very well known. It's known as the effect of the group. It's known as the field, because the coherence in the group is incomparably greater than our own, let's say, conductivity generated when we are given to our individual practices. And this takes us to still warming up kind of questions. Positioning hands. I have followed you and your work quite for a while. I have been following you and your work quietly for a while, and I'm very familiar with your meditations. I especially appreciate the rest afterwards to integrate the experiences in the nervous system. I work energetically by simply opening myself to the divine force and letting it flow through my hands. I have a question. I would like to know if it is advisable to place my hands on my belly while resting after meditation. It's not that I do something in the meantime, more that I just give myself to service as an instrument, so this force can flow through me and have a healing impact on my system. Let's clarify this. Yes, palms of our hands, as well as the soles of our feet, are known to be the points or the apertures where the energy oozing, literally, or oozes out. And this is why, the gesturally speaking, this could be found in the iconography of Indian deities, even early Greek deities. You can find that same kind of like goddesses, all these koras and korois, all these maybe in the iconography of other cultures, that open palm of the hand, certainly in the vocabulary of the Buddhist sculptures and paintings. So the hands are the apertures where the energy flows, and it is utilized and used by all healers and by people of various professions, right? Not just necessarily psychic healers or healers per se. An experienced masseur knows that energy flows through the hands, whether they like it or not. But when you are resting after meditation, you don't need to do that, because that energy circulating and reverberating in the entire neurophysiology. So if it feels more reassuring, more comforting to place your hands on particular parts, or on the torso, on solar plexus, on the heart, maybe on your tummy, do that. There's no harm in that, but you need to understand how this really functions. So it's not that you're now directing some kind of energy flow that comes or oozes out through your hands. That energy is now your whole field. You're bathed in that energy. So this is as clear as it gets in terms of what really is taking place. So it's just a matter of preference, really. And that takes us to Kriyas, but not meditation. Short background, well, no, not short, quite a bit of background, but very short question. After completing the Kundalini course, I concluded that I was not undergoing a full-blown Kundalini process. I felt that the symptoms I had experienced were likely due to the pre-awakening and initial steering or activation of consciousness. I have experienced spontaneous Kriyas for over 4 years now. During this time, I have experienced refined and unrefined movements and postures, spontaneous pranayamas, mudras, and vocalizations. Currently, I'm experiencing a lot of vocalizations, which usually start as moans but have progressed to chanting and singing notes and unknown words. These Kriyas are not occurring in deep meditation, as I have been unable to meditate for about 2 years now. My mind won't settle, and the spontaneous jerks and tremors are interrupting my focus on the breath. I sit each day to have Kriyas, but I don't feel that I'm meditating. I have assumed that my subtle pathways are too clogged for Kundalini to fully uncoil and penetrate the central channel. I guess I'm frustrated with what I feel as a lack of progress, particularly with regard to my daily practice, which I sometimes question the value of, as I'm no longer meditating, in parentheses. Question: I understood that chakras are dormant until Kundalini enters Sushumna and begins her ascent. So my question is, what is happening now? Okay, it's a very good question. Let's pour some tea. Because this question affords a possibility to clarify something for the one who is asking and for everyone else who might be still under that spell of the dilemma of, am I actually meditating? And I used to meditate, I used to sit, and there's no meditation, only Kriyas. So please consider this. All meditative methodologies, without exception, are aimed at, if we are to borrow the, let's say, example of what is expounded through the Patanjali Sutras, where we have a distinctive manual on the way to how to meditate, what meditation is, what it does. It has all these chapters, all these padas, all 4 of them, including the longest chapter on the psychic powers and the rest of it, all culminating in the final one where we're supposed to reach that state of Samadhi already, master the Samadhi, so that to separate Purusha from Prakriti, in other words, to separate spirit from the activity of nature. And since this system is dualistic, it is known as being dualistic, the job here is to abide in Purusha as that state, in a state of Kaivalya, that state of independence, separating, in other words, the two and abiding in the state. And Samadhi is what leads to that. So repeated experience of Samadhi. Emphasis of Patanjali Sutra is on Samadhi. However, if we are to look at other systems of yoga, and there is no shortage of them, the emphasis will often be placed on not so much on that what is emphasized in the Patanjali Sutras, but on awakening of the life force so as to facilitate the spontaneous nature of this, what we call self-realization. It is true to yogis, true to all the systems that could be grouped and under that umbrella of Hatha Yoga. It's true to the path of knowledge, true to the Gyanis, those who employ the system of self-inquiry which according to its most, let's say, illustrious propounder, that of, let's say, Ramana Maharshi in the 20th century, who also clarified that in a sweeping sentence that in both cases, in the case of the yogi, who will control the breath, who will control the movement of prana, and finally facilitate the awakening of life force, release of life force from dormancy. And it is true to the jnani, who will employ the power of the mind, the power of one-pointed awareness, with the method of self-inquiry. But in both cases, it would result in the unleashing of the life force, entering the middle channel and completing the job when one is ready to complete it. As simple as that. So in other words, equipped with this understanding, and by the way, the umbrella of this teaching also, as you have realized after taking the Kundalini course, is rooted in the Trika Shaivism. And according to Trika Shaivism, the purpose of all meditative practices is not to sit in Samadhi. It's to basically get reabsorbed into the fabric of one's own consciousness. What it means being reclaimed into a greater field of energy, for which there's a term Shakti. And this is known as immersion. So this is also explanation why we choose to call our programs not retreats, not intensives, but immersions. We've coined that term some 12 years ago, since we've gone on a road. And the term immersion here is an English translation of the term samavesha. So that is the goal here. So in other words, one can sit in meditation and enjoy meditation for many years, but then comes a point when one's field is activated and then the real process begins. So in other words, what you are presenting here, forgive me for, let's say, giving it this particular gloss, it's like you are complaining about being above the process of just sitting there and meditating. And it's not your fault, it's just this adjustment, this tweaking is required, so that you understand that what you call here Kriyas, but no longer meditation, is not to be complained about, but to celebrate. So make that very subtle adjustment in your psychology now, and you will see how far-reaching this is. I wish you brought that further back there, but we're not going to lament now of the time lost. Let's just implement this as of this moment. So the point is here not to sit in meditation and watch the breath. No, that's the entrance point. That's just an object of our attention to internalize the awareness. And we utilize this with directing our awareness to an object of a chosen, let's say, what will serve as that focal point where the awareness will begin to flow in that uninterrupted way. The point is not to sit and watch the breath at all. No. So give yourself to this Kriyas, give yourself to all this, and do not begin to question, why am I not sitting quietly and I'm being taken out of my comfort zone? Because that's the whole job right now. That's the whole phase. The sooner you realize that, the quicker you will go through that phase where some work needs to be done. You know that there is a term among the sannyasins who go, and you know how traditionally it was. It's not like you hang around your teacher. This is something else. This is like, in some cases, yes, but in a kind of a, let's say, in that more kind of a masculine approach, let's say, among the yogis, among the sannyasins, one finds a guru tests the guru, tests the spiritual preceptor, receives the initiation, receives that descent of energy as Shaktipat, receives the whatever that meditative methodology to accompany, and retrieves and does this its sadhana. So the person just goes and does the sadhana, and periodically they come to check, let's say, for a checkup. There is a term simply as I breathed. In other words, one was given to a practice of unstoppable, uninterrupted pranayama. When I read Swami Shivananda many years ago, as many as maybe nearly 30 years ago, maybe 28, I was stunned by that. There's like among themselves, like, where did you do your sadhana? And the response will be, oh, I breathed for 2 years in Kashi, or like in there, or I was in Allahabad, or I was like, up the Ganges somewhere above the Rishikesh. So it's like a slang among the yogis is not that I sat and meditated. No, one would sit down and immediately, spontaneous nature of the process kicks in. And that's why in that vernacular, I breathed, So reflect on this. And you will see, with this little tweak, with this little change, you will overgo now. You will have a leap in your understanding that nothing to complain about, not to worry about whether your system is too clogged. It is the job now of awakened life force to do this, okay? You just need to facilitate as favorable conditions as you could in terms of your interactions, daily interactions, activities, involvements, so that there is this balance between activity and rest, the food you eat and everything. We covered that in the Kundalini course, so I trust you are fully equipped with that. All right, so here's the shortest question of all, entitled Samadhi. I'm in the Samadhi, in brackets, complete absorption stage. How does one come out of it? How does integration happen? Are there any steps or pointers one has to take? Any guidance is appreciated. All right, so let's just clarify. At the time of writing this, you were not in Samadhi. Otherwise, you would not have been able to put yourself across clearly in writing, right? So what's the question then? Do you find it difficult to come out of Samadhi? Do you find it difficult to function, to focus? Do you find it difficult because you enter Samadhi and you don't know how much time passed? See, so you can't say, I'm in Samadhi stage. How does one come out of it? Well, it depends what kind of Samadhi you are in. If you are in Samadhi with no frequency, as that Nirvikalpa Samadhi, with no movement, no mental activity, very little, nearly zero metabolic activity, that's a different story. One should experience that to know what that is, in a way, even though that's not the goal. How do you come out of that? Well, I have a news for you. It's like no matter how deep that, when you fish, when you throw this thing, I forgot in English language, that what floats on the surface of the water, right? Well, you're trying to catch the fish. When you throw it and it has a heavy stuff at the end to let the part with the, let's say, right, with that hook to go deep down, it's bound to come to the surface because of the propensities that are present in your psyche. So Samadhi that is being experienced in meditation, unless one completely severs any ties with, let's say, what is considered as spoken of in terms of day-to-day phenomenal activity, engagement with the world, one will always come out, because there is already a propensity. There is this, if you will, these are the so-called not self-preservation, there are like these mechanisms which prompt the awareness to regain, let's say, the opportunities by redirecting the flow of prana, which prior to that totally is withdrawn, because that's what samadhi is. All pranic currents, all sensory activity is possible because pranic currents are extroverted. In samadhi, this is in reverse, they are introverted. And the greater the introversion, the greater we speak of that withdrawal, absorption. If samadhi is with frequency as savikalpa samadhi, then there's nothing to worry, because you are aware of what's happening, even if it's all faintly through some kind of, as if through the film. But there is a faint awareness of the environment, of the setting, of something. You are absorbed. It's also samadhi. It's easy to come out of that samadhi. Thanks to Swami Muktananda, the clarity was brought. For many people, many years ago, when people were only thinking that it is the nirvikalpa samadhi that counts for the most, and savikalpa samadhi was considered as inferior samadhi. Somehow that notion took hold that it is inferior. Yes, it is inferior if you are a complete and utter renunciation geared. If you decided you want to renounce this world somehow, if you decided that, for sannyasin and a renunciate, the nirvikalpa samadhi perhaps is more preferable, because they renounced household and nothing to run, no business to attend, nothing. They can go into meditation, come out of meditation, feel hungry, go beg for food, food will be given, go sleep somewhere, whatever, like cave, this, that, tent, depending where you. So it's like life brought to a bare minimum. For that, you don't need to be full of wits, But for the householder, savikalpa samadhi, in other words, that what's spoken as inferior, actually is more preferable, because the disparity between the waking state and characterized by the activity of the senses and the acuity of the mind is less apparent when there is a total withdrawal. So in other words, nervous system is cultured to function in a state where we experience absorption whilst there is still some activity. This is easier for integrating into our daily life. Therefore, we could also conclude it is actually more preferable for those for whom this would result in the spontaneous absorption with eyes open, known as sahaj samadhi. That what sahaj samadhi, the most coveted state, everyone talks these days about. In non-duality, that's the highest point, the highest goal, that sahaj samadhi, when you are absorbed whilst going about your daily activities. So, any pointers? Well, these are the pointers. So how does integration happen? Samadhi itself is integration. Another translation for the term samadhi, which we often use in our work, is not just absorption, but also integration. You see? So samadhi is where everything is integrated, because it's part of that process exemplified in the Trinity of concentration, meditation, absorption. That dharana, dhyan, samadhi. Concentration, in other words, our awareness has to be given and flow in certain direction. Concentration is required. Not that we need to remain concentrated. No, as soon as it's directed, pointed, then it naturally translates into meditation. That what is uninterrupted flow. And then that uninterrupted flow begins to appease this dynamic of the subject and object, and samadhi is a natural outcome. So integration is a natural outcome. Observe everything that you do, and you will see this is present in every activity. We have video released just now. It will be very helpful for you to watch as well. I don't know if it's released or not, but it's the video that I have seen our team is preparing, where this has been given great attention to. Perhaps we can share with everyone after this in a link pinned above somewhere. All right. That takes us to the following question: productive meditation. See, we kind of like now we warmed up and we're getting now into this warmer, hotter topic. So productive meditation. I've been on a spiritual path for many years, but was never able to maintain a daily meditation practice until attending your immersions. Since my recent second immersion with you, my practice has become much deeper, more profound, and very satisfying. I look forward to it every day and wonder what is going to happen next, since every day the experience is a little different. However, I certainly have not yet experienced anything like what I have heard others describe as a Kundalini awakening. And although I do not feel in any hurry, I cannot help but have some desire for my meditations to be as productive as possible. And the questioner helpfully put productive in inverted commas. Questions. I don't set specific intentions when going into meditation, other than the general intention to merge with the source. I try to just relax and be completely open to whatever the experience may bring. Would you recommend having specific intentions for my meditations that shift over time? And there is another long question, so let's answer this one first. I would not recommend setting intentions before meditations, but I will explain why, and also that doesn't mean that one shouldn't. Somehow, with years of practice and experience and clinical observations of working with others, this may, by the way, go against the grain of what is being often promulgated among those who, let's say, offer all this manifesting kind of methodologies, manifesting this, manifesting that into one's life, which is in itself an interesting thing, because we can speak of relationship we have with the self, or relationship we have with God or with Absolute, is always colored by predispositions. And even classically speaking, there are 4 predispositions how that relationship is colored. We always ask something of God, you see? And only when we don't no longer ask anything of God, but give ourselves to God or want God, that what is, at least according to the Bhagavad Gita, is considered to be the dearest to God. Okay? So this, just speaking from that perspective. So this is all colored already by these predispositions, and they are identified as being 4. I'm not going to go there right now, but setting intentions belongs to this slightly. So if you want to set intentions, I suggest that when you go into meditation just as we always recommend in our programs, and you may remember that. Remember when I begin the guidance? Sit as you are, with no agendas, with nowhere to go, nothing to attain, as fullness itself. Everything has been already realized, attained. You just offer yourself into this moment fully, without reservations. You see, it's the other way around. It's not that I want something from my meditation. I want something, something, something. I actually, it's in reverse. I'm returning myself. See? And then, not as being kind of clever about this and kind of, again, use it as a bargain, but it is still useful, because when we come out of meditation, particularly if it was a deep one, and as I always recommend, if meditation was prolonged enough, to lay down on one's back and rest for a few minutes, just to let that wave, let's say now, flow through the body, let all these pranic currents now circulate, and, like from that, whatever that meditation was, maybe more dynamic, or maybe more lulling, more that restful. And in that state, in that very, very subtle state, set the intention. Set the intention for whatever that is, for self-healing, for healing of your dearest and nearest, for healing of the world. Set the intention to manifest, nothing wrong with that. But when you sit down to meditate, you give yourself to meditation. See, that's the attitude. Okay, so second set of questions from the same person, productive meditations, entitled. In your Kundalini course, you talk about the importance of the pranic currents, of vayus. Would it be helpful for me to focus on each vayu for a period of time in my meditations, or do certain practices aimed at clearing these vayus one at a time? Or should I just remain open and trust that the process will unfold in its own time and in its own way? I suggest you just remain open and have deep faith that everything comes in its due time. Not that there is no possibility and no way to work with the pranic currents, but before we reach that level of proficiency, understanding, and experience when we can work with pranic currents, it is best we don't, because it's not how it works to begin with, you see? It's not that we work on a particular vayu, that particular pranic current, by clearing any particular vayu at a time. No. You take care of your physiology in your life, making sure that there is a natural movement of pranic currents. You see, all this belongs to the autonomic part of the nervous system. You don't do anything to breathe, you don't do anything to eat, you don't do anything to see, you don't do anything to hear, you don't do anything to experience this tactile sense that comes through touch. You don't do anything to smell, you see? Do you? No, you cannot do anything about it. It's granted, given. It's part of the autonomic nervous system. And likewise, all this is, or not likewise, that in turn is under the administration of all these pranic currents. So you cannot work at that level, what already does its job, you see? We ingest food not by thinking I'm going to ingest it. It's a natural, instinctual, spontaneous, body-savvy process. Likewise, when food is digested and it's time to evacuate, we don't do anything about it. Yes, if we, let's say, suffering from this or that misalignment, let's say something in our diet, something this and that, then we might experience some difficulty in relieving ourselves. Then that to be addressed at the physiological level, not sitting in meditation and trying to redirect the flow of prana into apana because one is suffering from constipation. You see? So I'm just trying to make it very clear for you what works by itself, on its own accord, and best not to interfere, but give oneself to that. When the proficiency is enough, we can then speak about it, how to work with these currents. But let's face it, in our day and age, householders' way of life, far and few between can really afford to give ourselves to the level that one can, come to these feats. And it's not necessary. So just enjoy what comes naturally. Okay? Next, Kundalini, awakening and extra prana. Some years ago, I focused on my breath for 30 days straight. Towards the end of those 30 days, many things changed and have never stopped. Most significantly, enhanced sensitivity to my emotions. It's like I have an amplifier now that amplifies all emotions. I feel anxiety and ecstasy. Enhanced sexual experiences, sometimes without thinking or touching anything of sexual nature. Kriyas, including singing, kumbhaka as breath retention, and bastrika as that fast pranayama. I feel like someone else is talking to me with a different voice than my own and with a different accent. This frightened me initially. Enhanced creativity. I'm a musician and a writer. I've almost never experienced writer's block after this point. The creative energy is always there. It's just a matter of opening up to it and tuning into. Guidance that comes forth from within, sometimes physically, such as shaking my head in a Kriya-like motion by nodding yes and no, and sometimes via streams of insights that feel and act differently from regular thoughts. Question. I am seeking understanding and guidance on this ongoing experience. In your Kundalini course, you said that some people believe they've had a Kundalini awakening, but it is just extra prana. What does this mean specifically related to my experience? Okay, let's also bounce off this question so as to clarify something for all of us. So, although modern literature and sources of information on Kundalini are replete with cases and accounts of purported complete and utter rise and self-actualization, we need to understand this with a bit more of feet on the ground attitude. And this is where I feel also the direction of the communication and, let's say, discourse began taking form in the past 2 years since we have delivered the course. What I mean by that is that there is this still strong understanding somehow that there is one's Kundalini transgressing through one's internal stages, phases, chakras, psychic centers, and it's all happening within individual when all this culminates to realization of one's essence through, let's say, that metaphysically spoken of like reaching the state of Sahasrara, merging with the source and so forth. However, if you reflect on this attentively and listen to some of the discourses we've delivered more recently, it's inconsistent with what this model represents. Because at the bottom of the pyramid, all our experiences are more varied. Our experiences are really varied, and the most varied at the, let's say, base level. But as this begin to move towards the apex, I'm using this as a pyramid, it could be spoken of as a cone, whatever geometrical shape that has this, let's say, base wider than the pinnacle. Maybe cone is more appropriate here, and then we'll introduce the spiral. As we move towards the apex, the experiences began to get less and less and less individually colored. There's less and less individually, let's say, colored experiences, to a point when at some point there's no such thing as speaking of, oh, my awakening was like this, and his awakening or her awakening was like that, or my merging was like this, and his merging was like that. This is inconsistent with the understanding. And what is consistent, though, in all the literature that we came across and still coming across to this moment, in all practically accounts, the higher it is to the apex, the more unifying the nature of the experiences, and to the point of when there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that these experiences can be spoken of in terms of how it differently it felt for him or her, this or that person. So this is, let's say, what perhaps in some of the mystic verses, poetry, like at a certain point, beyond the spheres of more what guards the and known as the expression of individuality, when there is a greater individuation, greater differences, all this begins to get less and less apparent. So in other words, the process of full rise of Kundalini is a very rare event. And I'm not trying to speak about it in terms of exclusivity. It's just a matter of fact. Why? Because that's what it represents. But what's important is that any movement of Kundalini, any movement, results in some movement of consciousness. So in many of us, in many human beings, using that language now, it's a concession, language driven by concession now. Kundalini may just have some resonance, maybe one or two really what could be spoken of and left in memory as the result of that extraordinary event, never to be reoccurring, never to be repeated. And yet it leaves the resonance for the rest of one's life in terms of the change in consciousness, and it's a qualitative change. One may be in that ladder of ascent at a very different stages of that ascent, but that does not mean that one somehow is inferior to another person. This is a different kind of language needs to be invented here to speak of superiority or inferiority. Whilst at the same time, we can't apply here one size fits all either. So to go back to what you have shared here, Kundalini awakening or extra prana. What I spoke in the Kundalini course is that a lot of cases, in my experience, maybe if one is pushed to give the some kind of statistics, some kind of figure-based here, 70% of those who claim to have Kundalini ascent, it was not a full Kundalini ascent, not even from the full Kundalini awakening, but more of this, what is considered and spoken of as steering and activation. Because, what I mean, because why this is difficult to base one's experiences on self-diagnostics and symptomatology, because everything boils down to how it is experienced in terms of certain phenomena of being filled with light, for example, experiencing almost at a somatic level as light is bursting everywhere. And all this is experienced in the cortexes, up in the head. But that is the case with all experiences, because that's where the experience is registered. You see? Experience itself takes place elsewhere, but this is where it is lit. This is where the electric processes take place. So any movement down there in Muladhara, in the base root chakra, would be accompanied by experiences in the cortexes as well. And it is only when Kundalini is really rising through Sushumna that foundational and fundamental changes take place, because it is accompanied by a process known as rewiring. This is where we go through reprogramming, rewiring. So this is why also true Kundalini process is inseparable from that limbo stages, because in the process of rewiring, many synaptic connections get unplugged. And when they get unplugged, the structure behind what is being considered to be so and so as the parameters of individual existence crumbles, because it is these synaptic connections, and there are millions of these synaptic connections. That's what gives us the sense of a full, let's say, full of that existence in terms of the fullness of the story, being born here and there in that particular setting, growing up. And it's all that kind of viscerally being me in every way. And then suddenly in major assault, when Kundalini rising to the higher cortexes, major disruption to these synaptic connections takes place because of the unplugging. Let's say, I don't know exactly, I'm not a neuroscientist. Out of millions of these connections, let's say half of them get unplugged. So imagine this is a vast area now of uncertainty in terms of what one is. Imagine if more. So this many cases, this being in the limbo, not knowing anymore where one is coming or going, who one is, all the way to the depersonalization complexes, are due to this unplugged state of all these synaptic connections, whilst new connections are not made yet. This is where the importance of spiritual teachings come from. I'm not going to go into this. Why? Because these synaptic connections that are based on subtler dimensions of how we understand ourselves to be, whom we understand ourselves to be, are not, oh, I'm the son of this woman, and I belong to this tribe, this nation, this city-state, this, that, and that. It's a different psychic connection. So these connections are being fostered. Yes, they're still belonging to the intellectual mental projections, just as in the, with reference to the scriptures, knowledge itself is the greatest bondage. Jnanam Bandha, as one of the Shiva Sutras, knowledge is bondage, because any knowledge reinforces here that what is known as what binds the knower. And knower needs to be free from the bondage where the knower found himself, you see? I'm giving this expansive response for you to understand, because you seek clarity and guidance in this ongoing experience. So the extra sensitivity here that you are referring to clearly is also a result of this process, because this, let's say, thinning of the layers often taking place. And given that your neurophysiological constitution is predominantly ruled by Vata, you need to know the basics of Ayurveda, but if you took the Kundalini course, you would know that, because we spoke about that, because Vata rules nervous system. So you need to basically understand for the rest of your life as this embodied being, you need to make sure you manage that more than anything else. Everyone else needs to do that. This is now speaking of common sense. Even in the one in whom consciousness is dormant and they're frying their own fish, they're not interested at the slightest about anything spiritual. If they are vata by constitution, predominantly, they need to take care of that, or they will be all over the place. They will be extra sensitive, they'll be extra this, extra that, constantly expanding themselves, because that's the nature of vata. Air and ether combines together, gives us dosha. Dosha means impurity. Elements are pure. Soon as elements are bound into a conglomerate, they become doshas, impure. See? So this is what I feel like you need to reflect on in terms of really what is taking place, and not worry much whether the awakening here is true Kundalini awakening or extra prana. So enjoy all that creativity. That's the whole point. Enjoy that creativity. Don't start coming up with some kind of now these pangs of self-doubts. Is the things going all right? No, don't worry about that. It's a process for life. This is what's the most important thing. If someone undergone a true awakening of Kundalini, you can't put genie back into the bottle, period. It will unfold by hook or by crook. So best we participate fully, 100%, 200%. And also, without this kind of new agey projections and expectations that we're just going to have a quick somehow, and it's all like down our, it's like now I've got it. So no, it's not like that. And as we expand further, we have the opportunity to look at it from other perspectives, so as to have this more of a all-encompassing perspective on the process, because it's also not linear and not to be understood as this verticality of going up, somehow ding, enlightenment, and job done. No, it's not like that. So this takes us to this very short question, third eye tension. I have spent a lot of time in India over the last 20 years, first in Osho's ashram, and then with masters from Osho's line, where I have had beautiful experiences. For a few years now, I have had some tension in the third eye area. After many years of meditation, it started slowly, but is now very intense. I have had stopped meditating. Not only does it cause tension and pain, but it also disrupts my sleep. Question: what can I do to heal my third eye? Okay, so first of all, there's nothing wrong with your third eye, right? The very term, what third eye stands for, is beyond any domain of your physiology. So what is here most likely happening is, if you've been using, and you don't mention this here, so I'm just now second guessing, that whatever meditation practices you've been given, if somehow there is an emphasis on placing one's attention on that point between the eyebrows from the inside, as in many meditation practices that is the case. You can find that being mentioned in yogic scriptures. Ramana Maharshi emphasized that. I believe Osho also spoke about that. So I just simply suggest that you go back to meditation, but change the focal point of attention from the so-called third eye, right? The point between the eyebrows, but place your attention on the heart instead. And maybe work with the breath. Maybe, I don't know if you have considered taking any of our courses. We have at least 2 online courses specifically dedicated to meditations, where we not only explore, but we also offer several guided meditations. One such course called Samadhi, and a more recent one, Seeing Through the Heart. So there are, for example, rare visualization-based meditations, which actually to the moment is a requirement for attending any of our live programs, because that will prepare someone to join the group from get-going. So I would recommend you to change the attention in meditation to in other areas. This should help. Okay. Collaborating with Kundalini. I experienced my Kundalini awakening 9 months ago. For the last 6 months, I have been aware of my chakras to the degree that I feel energy move through them. I can feel Kundalini working on them. And I feel the effects of food intake on my root chakra within 5 minutes of eating. Feeling the entire energy system electrified, numbing sensations, etc., which I experience in a continual manner of varying degree, but always present. Question: since I can feel the energies in this way, is it possible to collaborate with the Kundalini energy? Not to control it, but to work together with the conscious mind on particular areas that I have identified that need healing at the particular time it comes up within me. Yes, by all means. Kundalini herself is considered to be, traditionally, the greatest healer. In fact, we can speak of Kundalini with references to the rise of, let's say, psychology, particularly in someone like Carl Jung, of whom we spoke earlier, and a lot of the schools in transpersonal psychology, where some of the, let's say, therapists have gone through the Kundalini process. I have met these people, befriended some of them. They work with Kundalini actively, and they recommend also, so for those in whom life force is awakened, there is a much greater possibility for redressing these deep-seated, let's say, psychic tendencies, along with traumas, along with all that what otherwise is nearly impossible to reach through the conscious level of the mind. For reasons that are very obvious, we cannot access with conscious mind that which belongs to the subconscious or unconscious areas. So, and Kundalini is known as that which brings everything from the level of the unconscious to the surface of our awareness. See, so this is why Kundalini is spoken of in many cultures as the greatest healer. She is, in fact, here as that feminine power, that healing power. We can find these allusions in Kabbalah, we can find these allusions in ancient Egypt, we can find these allusions in ancient Greek mythology. Speaking of mythology, right? We can find all this, how the going through the ordeal of what is known, spoken of as psychological breakdown, a crisis, which is basically a part and parcel of coming to greater maturation of what is really here taking place in terms of this individual being who is experiencing all this. So collaboration here with Kundalini need to be understood in terms of allowing and consciously opening up to the healing power of Kundalini itself, whilst we also do whatever we can in our daily life to facilitate the healthy container for the Kundalini do her job, because that's what she does anyway. You see? So if you feel like there are areas that needs greater attention, greater healing, then of course, opening up to that field, you can even have intimate dialogue. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as it remains at that level. The more intimate it is, the less it is exposed to anyone and anything, the greater power it has, because goes without saying, in our day and age, in the age of social media, in the age when we are almost obsessive about making everything known there and then, turning it all into the striptease of some kind for the benefit and like quick gratification of what God knows what is gratified here, not quite clear to me. So, in other words, the answer is yes. Control and spontaneity is the next question. For several months, I have had pain in my left shoulder. Now, during the weekend in Poland with you, during a meditation while Kriyas were happening, I felt just a second before it happened that a strong twisting movement was going to happen in both shoulders. And I knew it would not be good for the pain in my left shoulder. I probably could have stopped that movement before it happened, but I let go into it spontaneously. The movement happened twice, making the shoulder sore and worsening. The pain in the next few days. Worsening the pain in the next few days. Would it have been better to stop the upcoming movement, or was it good to let it happen? To surrender to the process, to say yes to pain even without knowing why it was happening? And in general, can life become an ongoing, so to speak, Kriya affair, where everything is spontaneous and spontaneity can reabsorb in itself also duties and responsibilities? That will be awesome. I love the way you put it. Well, I can tell you, man, that's the great way to look at it. Why not? Kriya affair. I'm gonna take a license, if you don't mind, to use that in our work. So yes, Kriya affair. So I'm starting my response to the last question of yours. So in a way, if we can lean and allow completely and utterly, delegate all our troubles and worries into that field, which will also include and incorporate all our duties and responsibilities, then I think we will be definitely better off. That being said, it has to be done not in a way where we simply somehow, maybe inadvertently, subtly, fallen to the tendencies of some form of bypassing, where we kind of eagerly delegate everything, and with that delegation, we feel all this, it's like, water for geese neck, as they say. I think that the difference, again, may I bring this as a reminder, between householder and renunciate, is that a radical difference here is perhaps exemplified in that renunciate is already deliberately walked out on the world of affairs. Walked out. So it's an honest in a way. You can't hold a renunciate for walking out. Although even that is debatable, because we know examples how renunciates have been known for helping each other and the rest of it. I'm not going to go there. Just there's plenty of accounts of compassion and not just standing on one's leg because that's one's sadhana and ignoring the way the life unfolds around. Whereas for us householders, everything matters here in this world, everything, because that's our choice. We tend to the affairs of the house. We tend to the house which each and every one of us somehow live, even if temporarily, to the bigger house that we all share. So we have our duties and responsibilities. That's part and parcel being in the house, living in a household. And going to the first question about the shoulder, how to give oneself. So this needs to be taken with the clarity and a pinch of salt. So please don't use this, whoever listens to this, into do's and don'ts. With that being said, if one is in a deep enough field, or if the pranic movement already issued and facilitated, and one is in that pranic current all the time, soon as one stops paying attention to something, because this also redirects the prana, right? If you're not doing physical exercise, if you're not conversing with someone where certain exertion of mental energy is required, when you're not involved in making something manual, cooking, I don't know, like making something as a physical object, solving some kind of whatever dilemma here or there, where some kind of emphasis, this or that, of this or that kind of energetic current required. Soon as we step back, there is this immediately sense of energetic pranic activity. Then that in itself gives us a license to allow these movements to do their job. And I've often said that lying back periodically on our spine, certainly when we go to sleep, before we go to sleep, to give completely ourselves to these frequencies, often accompanied by Kriyas. Everyone knows that. Body shakes, the waves go through, the spine may click, there's this alignment, this kind of the system checks itself, you see? Certainly this can be done in meditation, particularly in the group settings when there is a greater coherence and field. So yes, it would be accompanied by pain. Sometimes pain comes out, not sometimes, oftentimes it comes out through pain because something adjusts itself. So if this is on a psychosomatic level, that's what is being experienced as that pain in your left shoulder for several months. If it's not the result of an actual physical accident, trauma, some impact, but even then, as soon as I said this, there are perspectives, like let's say in Taoistic perspective, which is used in Chinese healing systems, there is no such thing as an accident. Even if a football player severs his hamstring whilst playing an important match, is not because, he was playing sports and exerted himself fully. No, it's something already heralds at a psychosomatic level. That's how at least that system looks at it. Nothing happens there for no reason. Even if someone who has been doing something as the complete and utter dedicated activity and something happens to them, that's how all traumas happen. Anyone who is involved in any kind of activity that has this, let's say, physically challenging aspects, it is known that it is accompanied by traumas. And if looked into it attentively, why trauma happened and in what particular part, is because something came on the level of the body, as simple as that. So this is why when I start saying if there was a trauma, physical impact, and I immediately adjusted myself, because there are perspectives, more radical ones, which do not even consider that there is just an accident. There are no accidents, right? As Mr. Oog said in the, what is it, Kung Fu Panda? Remember that classic? I recommend everyone to rewatch it. It's a great, great classic of today. Okay, so you can give yourself to that when the propensity for the body to move totally and utterly spontaneous, not because there is, even if there is an iota, well, I feel discomfort here, let's see what, if it, so in other words, if it's completely and utterly involuntary, in other words, there's no mental process involved whatsoever, then if there is this still safety valve somehow holding you against it, that in itself perhaps didn't allow for it to be, let's say, to adjust it, which in many cases is the case. But if what manifested itself, let's say, as that aching left shoulder, it may be something that needs to be redressed in areas of your life, you see? So that's the trick about the psychosomatic nature of all physical alignments, or disalignments. You may need to recognize what is it related to. So as we spoke about this license, I want to also introduce another license here, a possibility of the license where in that recessed, subtle, semi-transcended state, we can open our field for receiving the information. What is it related to? And then intuition can just suddenly spring forth and gives us an indication, or maybe a direct insight, why that is and what area of your life this is related. I've had that many times happen to myself, to many parts of the body, where body would communicate something in often agonizing way, and trying to treat it allopathically, almost of no value, because it will come back, you see? We're not talking about broken bones, right? So let's not completely say goodbye to any common sense. So obviously, when something is broken, we go and adjust and wear plaster, right? We don't sit down there convulsing in agony and hoping that Shakti is going to fix it now. It's not the case. But when it comes to something happening in meditation, in the process, this is a license to work at these both ends. One, open up yourself to the possibility of that insight, and another is to give yourself totally to the nature and power of the Kriya to redress that. Okay? All right, dears. And this takes us to, this is a rather long background, so long that in fact I would be forgiven for hopefully making it more concise so as to be able to respond to maybe other questions. But I'll give the overview. So it's entitled Karmic Burdens. Karmic Burdens. I come from a conservative Christian family. Throughout my childhood, I've witnessed a great deal of turmoil including conflicts, unhealthy rituals, and instances of abuse. As a child, I had profound moments of meditation and even astral projections. I feel that as a result of me being connected with myself at that age, I have absorbed a significant amount of negative energy associated with these experiences. Later in life, due to the sense of shame deeply ingrained in my family's history, I resorted to lying about my identity. This led me to disconnect from my emotions, particularly in the lower part of my body. After Kundalini awakening, I found myself predominantly focused on the upper energy centers, expanding my awareness through a lot of meditation and the occasional use of psychedelics and marijuana. However, I neglected to ground myself fully, particularly in the low regions. Recently, as the energy began to shift downward, I started to reconnect with these regions. The process has been quite painful, as I struggle to allow the energy to flow freely. It seems like everything is upside down for me. Kundalini is going down. I first had this realization, and now I've started discovering yoga postures that help me with bringing the energy down and activating pranas. This challenge extends to my physiological well-being as well, since there are often issues with digestion. I'm also seeking guidance on how to protect myself, as I have noticed a significant difference in realization between the upper and the lower centers. Consequently, it seems that I accumulate more karmic burdens from my every around surrounding, which seems difficult to clear compared to individuals who have achieved a balanced development across all centers. It often feels as though others attach themselves to me, which I perceive as a manifestation of my karmic debts. In brackets, Rahu is in my current Mahadasha, and in many places my chart is about karmic debt. This unfortunately prevents me from fully relaxing in social settings and makes me avoid people, as I fear absorbing excessive energies without being able to cleanse myself effectively, resulting in stagnation or slower progress. Question: how can someone who is highly attuned to the upper energy centers with expanded awareness and a lot of Shakti, but has big contractions in the lower parts, effectively ground and digest this energy and protect themselves from other people's karma? I would be immensely grateful for any insights, practices, guidance, or advice you can offer. So let's begin with some maybe fundamentals in the question. And I speak to that in view of the entirety of that background that is shared here. First of all, we cannot protect, okay, ourselves from other people's karma. Even if someone comes across and offers the methodologies of how to protect one from karma of others, it doesn't work like that. Proper understanding of the doctrine of karma, of the law of karma, is that in itself there is no such thing as fairness or unfairness. It's the law of cause and effect. It could be also spoken of as self-administering power or self-organizing power that governs everything in the universe. This is how, for example, I've learned with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Now, it's just as beautiful, as clear as it can be put. Self-organizing power, self-organizing, self-administering. So what does it mean? It means that no one is given less or more of what they can or cannot take. We can endlessly speculate on who has better karma, and some people obviously at a glance, at a face value, are better positioned in life. But when we look into it attentively, it's only a superficial view. We don't know. This is why I like this reminder, be kind, everyone is fighting their own battle, like everyone. So it's a reminder that no one is exempt here as long as they are in the body from dealing with something. And also, what I'd like to offer you before we go anywhere further is to reflect on this, that there is no such way as absorbing karmas of others, because that goes against the understanding what we experience in this life. If it's your karma to experience it, my dear, tough titi, as they say. You can protect yourself, you can wear amulets, you can wear this, that, this, and that. You can do these workshops, cleansing workshops, check in on, like, somewhere where it's like least interactions. You meant to experience something, it will be brought to you, delivered to the door. This is a clarity, you see, of understanding in terms of what karma truly represents. If you understand that, you no longer even waste a fraction of energy, mental, otherwise, in terms of why your life is as it is. And this is advisable to all of us and applicable to all of us. So it's not at all somehow a pessimistic view on, or like, how they sometimes like, oh, this notion of karma, it's like, it has this Judeo-Christian undertones, right? Like, and Hindus absorb that into their body of knowledge. No, we're not speaking about it from the point of view of punishment. We are speaking about it purely from the point of view of self-administering power of the universe, where all of us are here on the journey to the self and nowhere else. And on the journey to the self, we are encountered by myriad of encounters. Each of these encounters is reflecting some portion of truth in the way we meant to go through. That is karma. So not to be taken literally, that there is a, I've done this and now. Yes, there are settling the accounts. We talk about it as well. Yes, there is this Rananubandhana, literally paying the bills. That's what it means. It's like settling the accounts with so-and-so. The more intense the relationship with someone, the more of that Rananubandhana would be at work there. Distant relationships, not intense relationships, don't come under that category. Anywhere we feel we are, where there is this air of viscosity, no way to really not to go there. Something is being there to be processed. So this is first fundamental understanding about what karmic burdens here represent. Now, with regard to how is it possible that, according to what you have shared, that there is a access and dwelling and somehow proficiency and being in the higher centers, and then not so much in the centers which are associated with the seat of vitality. But that's not uncommon at all, particularly when it comes to the Manipura, that the city of jewels, because that area also represents the spaghetti junction, if we may call it frivolously, of all these diversions of energy and connecting routes and everything. All the 10 major pathways of energy proceed from there, as you know. I don't know if you have taken the course or not. No, there's no reference to that. But in the course, we speak about it, how, in terms of the complex network of all these pathways of energy, the 10 principal nadis proceed from that region of the Kanda, which is just in the area of associated with Manipura. And that is also the seat of vitality, ceaseless movement of the diaphragm, right? As that lower dimension of the breathing. The high dimension is the respiratory organs. But what makes the respiratory organs? The breathing can be seen as we inhale and exhale, but in fact we don't. This is an illusion. It's the movement of the lower seat of the vital. That's why often we begin our meditation in turning the attention to the movement of the diaphragm. Everyone who has sat enough and knows a thing or two about spontaneous retention of breath knows how this is all completely and utterly checked by the movement, either concaved in or protruding outward movement of the diaphragm. Every breath we take, therefore, here is checked by the movement of the diaphragm. You see? So what's the breathing? You tell me. Is it because I inhale? Yeah, I can do that voluntarily, you see? But the involuntary breathing goes by itself. And the breathing becomes more refined when there's a more refined an appeasement in the diaphragm. Likewise, breathing can be arrested, held. And again, it is because that spontaneous contraction takes place on inhalation or exhalation, which seizes the breath. But it's all done there. So it's a seat of lower vital. We often refer that in our work. So what do I recommend? I recommend at the therapeutic level to spend more time where you can give yourself to that, where that connection to this, let's say, seat of the low vital is. Cook your own food. Plant plants, grow something yourself. Water the plants, walk barefooted. Do something with earth, you see? Connect to plants all the time. Plants grow on the planet Earth, even though they reach to the sun, because they want nothing less than to absorb all this through the process of photosynthesis into the fabric of their structure, which then presents itself in this myriad of magnificent kingdom of plants, as we know, right? From leaves to flowers to fruits. All this is to connect to, not let it pass by. This in turn may invoke some emotional responses, connectivity to what we eat, you see? So in other words, put your hands back into the soil. Put your hands back into what we do on a daily basis. So in other words, for those who are too engrossed in the physical, they need to be reminded of the higher, so-called higher. So reading of the scriptures, listening these refined discourses, reading the poetry, something which takes them beyond the domain of that viscosity of the physicality, something which helps them to transcend. But when it's somehow at the expense of, balance is required. And how do you bring the balance? It's not on a mental level, and it's not meant to be used and practiced at the level of therapeutic application. No, you have to learn, love doing something with your feet, with your hands, with your eyes, with your skin. You see? This psychological well-being, you see? The psychological well-being is a balance of the high and the lower, harmony of the high and lower, of the heaven and the earth, here in this body, in this physiology, because that's what we are. I think that should suffice for you to venture on your own, and you will receive plenty of that spontaneous guidance as you give yourself now to this, okay? And perhaps what would be a closing question here. Responsibility to abusive parents. It's not exactly under the theme of Kundalini per se. It doesn't speak to that at all. But there is something that feels fitting to bring into our gathering today. So, responsibility to abusive parents. I have been pondering the spiritual responsibility one has to their family of origin, if there is one, especially in cases of dysfunction and abuse. Sometimes you came across the thought that you choose your family and that it is part of your soul's journey. On the other hand, I see the value in this framing for resilience and perspective. But what can one do when a family's dysfunction is directed at a child, even into adulthood? Of course, you can compassionately understand the pain, distortions, and unresolved issues the family or parents have and love them. Isn't that enough? Is there a greater responsibility to care for and spend time with them as they age? As a mother, I see how much time and energy I have devoted to my child. I know when dysfunctional and abusive parents must do their best, no matter how insufficient. I also know how experience that personal healing affected my relationships and perspectives, and I understand that part of what creates resistance in wanting something other than what is present. But how could you not in the case of dysfunction and abuse? Questions. Is there a spiritual assignment to be the scapegoat or the black sheep of the family? Is there a spiritual responsibility to one's family, parents? It's a tough one. Tough one in a sense because we can't speak about this in terms of turning this into some kind of a system of thought. There are so many underlying currents here, so many, too many to just give it, let's say, a general, let's say, blanket. So, now, first of all, I don't believe that there is a spiritual assignment to be a scapegoat or a black sheep in one's family or in any family. You know, there's no such thing. There's no assignment as such is given. It's how we feel. You see, this is more honest. It's how we often feel, how often it feels in terms of what we have to experience in this life and where life placed us. Inadvertently, one way or another, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with that or not, for our own growth, because there's no other way. And why that is because there is truly no other way. What do I mean by that? Because there is no other way. The way we experience reality in itself is a sacred dimension of how it is being experienced on our behalf by that reality itself. This is the expression of fullness, even if from that what we call human perspective, it may seem utterly and entirely unfair. And of course, one can protest and throw against this kind of responses that, well, it's easy for you to talk. But again, You don't know my life. You don't know what I'm faced with. You don't know what I had to go through and yet to go through, right? I don't know myself what I'm yet to encounter. I'm clueless. What I'm yet to encounter. What life has there in store. As a parent, I fathered 5 children, 4 of them alive. The eldest, she's an adult. The youngest, the eldest is 33, the youngest is 3.5. Of course, I will be the one who will harvest all the fruits of my actions as a parent. How functional or dysfunctional all this was is there to be harvested. See? So, is there spiritual responsibility to one's family? I don't understand the term spiritual responsibility. Maybe let's drop spiritual. There is a responsibility to one's family per se. Responsibility which needs to be understood first and foremost as to attend to one's level of consciousness, because that's where responsibility begins. If we do not rise above our own limitations and circumstances, if we did not do everything in our power, capacity to incorporate, reabsorb, transcend, make peace with, heal, lull back into the place of okayness and a place of connection, then we cannot expect and cannot be expected to be responsible for anyone, because our primal responsibility towards ourselves has not been fulfilled. So therefore, before tending to others, we must do everything we can to tend to ourselves. This is, if we are to use the term spiritual, this is the most important of all spiritual axioms. All the most important spiritual axioms proceed from that understanding. Whether this is this or that culture, this reminders are plenty these days, past days. Before tending to others, before healing the world, saving the world, doing and being of service, we must save ourselves. So when that is being understood, then we work on all this, what stands on our way to reclaiming of our status, true status of being human. Being and human seamlessly incorporated, blended in such a way that we cannot pull them apart. Being and human are one and the other. There's no such thing just being or just human. It's being human. This is rising to our status. No one is a black sheep. No one is a scapegoat. Up until we think that we are put in life somehow in any such position, we perpetuate all this, what in the first place was meant to dent somehow us. But that denting here is the wabi-sabi of the creator. That denting here in itself is nothing is perfect. So the master, the craftsman, creates that dent, that chip, that roughness, that rough edge adds to the beauty, to who we are, uniqueness, unique in our upbringing, unique in our even suffering, because that suffering also becomes the crack where the light shines through. We somewhere mentioned earlier, there are ways of coming back home. There are ways psychologically. There are 4 types of people who long for God, long for the lost sense of self. And one of them is through suffering. In other words, it maybe feels unfair, but there is a reminder, we have to borrow Hindu scriptures for a moment again, that in our day and age, in the age of darkness, in the age of Kali Yuga, that iron age, it is through the suffering that many of us rise to the true status, because that suffering here is only second to those who simply want God for God's sake, those who simply want to give themselves or know God for what it is, who it is, whatever it is, language here, apparently imperfect to speak about these matters. But all other, let's say, categories and groups, one way or another, are in a loop still. Someone wants power, and then they go about this. Someone wants to manifest, they go about this. Someone wants this, someone was constantly hankering for something more. Fine. But the suffering here is that wabi-sabi. Suffering is that crack. It's that filled with gold kintsugi. It's that what makes you unique. Love your uniqueness there. Don't make this into a chip on the shoulder to run around and parade the world, or the medal, let alone to wear. No. Realize that there is none other than yourself like that. And then you will see how all the responsibilities are being tended in a natural manner of priority, not by virtue of analyzing, scrutinizing. You must do this, you do this, that's all. That's what the life of householder is. Householder acts on a response to any given moment in time, to whatever the situation rises. This is why I like the analogy of householder with all these, samurais and kshatriyas, all these knights of Templar, right? The age, the gone by age of chivalry. The chivalry in action today in the life of a householder is to be fully ready, always to rise to whatever needs to be tended to, always ready. This is the nobility. This is where the life of the warrior, the path of the warrior, and the path of the householder overlap. You see? So, those who do not suffer do not know the flavor of bliss as delightful as those who went through suffering, and they know the difference. And that's where recognition dawns that no one is placed here in any way as a scapegoat. So, our ideas, I know that live chat is quite busy. It's hard to tell what to give attention to, but just traditionally we pick up maybe a question quickly on the go before we part our ways. Hard to tell if there are any questions that are, because there is almost like a conversation going between the participants. So if the team hasn't selected any questions for me that sound more interesting, I will give it a minute to see, because that's how we've done it in the past. If there is an interesting question to respond to from the chat, that I'll be more than happy to do that. I don't see any messages here, so I guess we are ready to close this now. Okay? So give it just another minute. Okay, dears, well, whatever questions in the chat that haven't been answered, or the questions that have been submitted, perhaps we can put them in our files, and if there's an opportunity, we'll revisit them. But otherwise, thank you everyone for getting together, and thank you team for facilitating, for organizing this. So blessing everyone. So I wish everyone beautiful unfoldment wherever one is, into the greater power, into the greater awareness of one's own self, and into a greater and greater ways of connecting to this reality that we embody here, down to the senses, so that all together we participate in this world in a direct and truly all-encompassing manner, instead of letting it go and unroll by itself in an uncertain direction, in ways that we somehow feel that we are incapable of. It's all down and boils down to the way we hold this all at the needle point of our awareness. So this realization needs to be cherished. So, and see you at our live programs and into our next live broadcast. Blessings and love to all. Bye for now.